We're going to be fixing a garage crack with carbon fiber stitches and 10-minute mender. This is got both in it in this video. Here we have a garage crack that's been ignored for way too many years. Here I'm using a 4.5-inch diamond turbo blade. Giving it a quick clean. Get all the contaminants out. You don't have to do too crazy. Just getting any of the... You basically want to get the sides of the crack cleaned up so the mender has something to stick to. Just kind of following the crack. Using a vacuum to contain the concrete dust, because concrete dust is toxic. If your vacuum's terrible, you may need a respirator. Just going along the complete length of the crack. Once you've done that, we're going to go into repairing it. So in this case, we're going to be adding sand to the crack. This adds as a filler or clot for the 10-minute mender. This prevents the mender from just running into the floor and into the soil below. This needs to be sandblasting sand or quartz. It can't be play sand because play sand has dirt in it. It also needs to be dry. Getting a nice, good, quick install. And now we're going to be going into 10-minute mender. We sell it in any variation between jugs or tube sets. I prefer jugs. It's easier to use. Here I'm just using a dollar store squeeze bottle. I'm putting 200 mils of each, and I'm going to give it a good shake. Smaller batches if you're new to the product. And just giving it a good shake, getting it ready to use. About 5 seconds of shaking, and then you can start adding it to the sand. 10-minute mender does flow through 6 inches of sand, so this little bit that we've added will not clog the crack. It's one of the thinnest products we probably stock. Just running a nice saturated bead on top of the crack. Just like that. Making sure it stays saturated, following it all the way along. And then you're going to want to add more sand on top of it, especially anywhere where there's a puddle. Because oftentimes the mender pulls the sand into the floor. So now you want to fill that void up again. Then you're going to want to trowel the sand in. I like using my gloves. You can use trowels. I often use my gloves. I just find it simpler. Do a little touch up with the sand, and then you just gotta let it cure 10 to 20 minutes. Pretty easy to use. You can either scrape it off or you can grind it off. Either or. Scraping requires a bunch of labor, but it is doable. Later in the video here, we're going to be installing carbon fiber stitches for reinforcement of this crack to prevent re-cracking in the future if you've deemed it's a movement crack. Here I'm just adding a little bit of touch-up mender, so I'm just going to add a little bit in the squeeze bottle from the dollar store. Give it about 5 seconds of shaking. Then add a nice little top coat on top. This is just to verify I didn't miss anything. If you grind and find a spot that you missed, you can redo it. It's not an issue that way. You can always re-diamond blade it and try again as well. You can also mix mender up as a putty inside the cup with the sand, and that way you can use it on vertical surfaces like with a trowel. We have some other videos on that, but it's pretty manageable once you clot it up. So this is after the cure time, after about 20 minutes. I'm using an X-Acto blade and a special handle. It scrapes up pretty easy. If you don't like the staining, you can use tape and paper to protect it. But in this case, I'm going to be surface grinding, so I'm just doing the scraping for the video purpose. Here's the default method is just using a surface grinder to give it a quick cover over. This also returns the concrete around it to the original color. In this case, I'm a little early on the grinding, but it does not affect it. You'll see it get wet here in a little bit. That's normal. I'm probably at like the 8-minute mark for grinding, as we were on a bit of a time crunch on this project. Now we're going into installing some carbon fiber stitches. So this is after the crack repair is completed. So I'm going to get one of the stitches to use as a guide for the marker. Pretty simple. Just mark out where you got to cut it. The stitch kits come with 15 stitches and enough epoxy for those stitches. It's important to note that there's enough epoxy for the stitches, but not for the crack repair around it. So you're going to want to fix the cracks in advance. Here I'm using the same turbo blade I was using to cut the crack out. Now I'm cutting the stitches in with the same grinder. This grinder happens to cut to the exact depth I require, so it's kind of handy. I didn't have to do any depth checking. Deeper's better, but in this case the grinder did exactly what I needed, so it worked out pretty handy. Letting the grinder do its work and then giving it a quick vacuum. Here we're only cutting 3 or 4 of the 15 stitches just for time saving on the video. In the paper instructions that come with it, there is instructions on how to mix the epoxy for small individual stitches. I prefer to install all 15 in one go, just for mixing the epoxy as one big bag. Our kits come with the epoxy in a bag, so you don't require a caulking gun, and it wastes less product with the mixing of the mixers on the caulking tubes. So in this case, you actually get more epoxy for what you're installing. And you don't need a caulking gun, you don't have a giant box that comes with it and such. The whole kit's kind of designed to be disposable. We also sell the turbo blades if you find them on the tool section of the website. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to email us. We have a very responsive technical support line. Now we're going to installing the stitches. So you're going to want to dry install the stitches. Here I'm just installing one just to make sure there's no rocks or anything in the crack. And now I'm mixing the epoxy that I squeezed out of the bags. It should turn into a darker brown epoxy. I just use it on the back of a regular piece of cardboard, nothing complicated. It has a really slow cure time, so you can install all 15 stitches with one mix. This is kind of why I prefer it, because in large jobs I just mix a giant batch and go crazy. If you're looking at stitches to put underneath an epoxy floor coating and you're worried about the cure time of the epoxy, what we've been known to do is we install the stitches a little deeper, and then we put a little bit of mender on top for the fast cure, so the slow cure epoxy does not affect the floor coating of vinyl chip and such. Because unfortunately anything that has good bonding strength has a slow cure time. So mender does bond great, but there's a reason we're not using it for the carbon fiber, because it sticks to concrete really well but doesn't stick to anything else like carbon fiber or steel. Here I'm just installing the stitch pre-wet, and then I'm going to be pushing the epoxy that got pushed out back into it, using the trowel to make sure it's all the way in, and then I'm recovering any of the excess epoxy back onto the cardboard. You can use tape and paper and tape these out to prevent spread of the epoxy. In this case I'm surface grinding afterwards, so it was not a big deal. So you dry install the stitch, pull it back out, take some epoxy, push it into the trench until you see it bursting out the sides, then it indicates it's full. Once you see signs of indication that it's full, you take a new stitch and wet it before you stick it in. So here I'm wetting the stitch, getting it nice and wet on both sides. This is pretty important to make sure the residue actually sticks. And then you're going to push them in, and of course epoxy will squeeze out. You're going to use a trowel to make sure it's set all the way in, and then you're going to use the trowel to push more epoxy on top of it, and then recover any excess. Just like that. And you just rinse and repeat all 15 times. You can see in this case the crack went in a Y formation, so I had to stitch in both directions. It's important to go cross or diagonal of the crack, because that's how carbon fiber works. Carbon fiber is a tensile strength, so putting it with the crack doesn't do a thing. It has to be a diagonal or across the flaw. This applies to carbon fiber cloth as well. If you're putting the carbon fiber with any type of crack, you're reducing the amount of strength you're actually going to get. And recovering the epoxy and on to the next one. In this case, I'm going to be wetting the stitch again, applying a nice thick layer to the stitch, both sides, and then pushing it into the trench, using the trowel to get it just deep enough, and recovering any excess epoxy. Rinse and repeat, and you have reinforcement to your cracks. 24-hour cure time, a little faster depending on how you mix it. Like I said, for the guys trying to do epoxy floor coatings, you can add some mender to the top, just to increase that cure time, so you can actually epoxy it same day with the epoxy floor coatings. I do that all the time, but otherwise just wait the full day. These kits are available in single 15 stitch kits, and I believe there's a 40 stitch kit which comes with extra epoxy and a cutting blade. If you require something else, just give us an email. We can definitely make custom orders. We specialize in carbon fiber repair, epoxy kits, polyurethane kits, and 10-minute mender slab repair. So if you need anything that involves fixing concrete, we likely have it. So give our website a look. Everything ships usually same day, and if there's a price on the website, it's in stock. So look forward to seeing your order.